Hello people, just so you know, in the background clips of War Thunder, I will be playing the American M1 Abrams tank and not the Zulfiqar, because there is no Zulfiqar tank in War Thunder and the Zulfiqar is very similar to the Abrams anyways. In fact, some Iranian army officials even call the Zulfiqar tank project the Iranian Abrams project. So just so you know, it's an M1 Abrams and not the Zulfiqar. Anyways, enjoy watching this video.
Hello and welcome. I don't think I have to mention the situation in the Middle East right now. If you've opened Instagram or Twitter in the past few days, you probably know what's going on between Iran and Israel.
Hitler.
And since it's only like the fifth time this year they are having a go at each other, I thought it would be the perfect time to make a video about Iran's Zulfiqar main battle tank. The name Zulfiqar comes from the twin-pointed sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib, by the way. In this video, we will cover how the Zulfiqar was developed, what makes it work, how it fits into Iran's military plans for the near future, I guess, and also what it means in the eyes of Israel. Iran conceived the Zulfiqar in the early 1990s after the Iran-Iraq War, when it became clear the country needed a homegrown tank due to sanctions and war losses. Very surprisingly, begging for spare parts from the international community wasn't a sustainable military strategy. Brigadier General Mir Yunus Mazzoumzadeh, who by the way once tried to brew Persian tea inside a tank engine, led the project starting around 1993. The first prototype appeared in 1994, with 6 semi-industrial prototypes tested in 1997. Iran even set up a production line in 1996 and 1997 at the Shahid Kolah Doz complex to build the tanks domestically. President Hashemi Rafsanjani himself established this tank factory in 1997. And you know, it's not gonna be a good tank if the president himself puts his nose in. The Zulfiqar's design is often described as a hybrid of American and Soviet technology. In fact, it's a bit of a Frankenstein's monster in a good way. Engineers combined features from several tanks into one glorious, underfunded middle finger to military embargoes. For example, based on the American M48 and M60 pattern, the Zulfiqar's suspension strongly resembles the M60's, a tank Iran had in its inventory from pre-1979 days, which was before the Islamic Revolution when Iran used to be an ally of the West. The overall configuration is similar to the M48 and M60. Iranian designers basically took a proven American foundation and built upon it. Also, the power pack is reported to be derived from the American M60 as well. Sources note a 780 horsepower diesel engine in early versions. Not huge by modern standards, but enough to move its roughly 36 to 40 ton weight at about 70 kilometers an hour on roads. For comparison, the US M1 Abrams has about 1500 horsepower, but also has much heavier 60 plus ton weight. The transmission, called SPAT 1200, is said to be a local adaptation of the M60's gearbox. In addition, the Zulfiqar uses a 125mm 2A46 smoothbore cannon taken from the Soviet T-72 tank. Very original, I know. It's fed by an autoloader, also from the T-72, so the crew could be reduced to 3 men: commander, gunner and driver. Interestingly, the tank's turret is an original Iranian design, steel welded with a distinctive boxy shape. It has composite armor modules on the front. Later versions feature explosive reactive armor blocks on the hull and turret. The Zulfiqar's ability to mount ERA was a point of pride for Iran. There were even reports of an active protection system tested on a Zulfiqar in 2016 using radar and defensive munitions to shoot down incoming rockets. However, it's unclear if that APS became operational. It's worth noting that such systems are similar in concept to Israel's trophy APS on Merkava tanks, but Iran's is still experimental and not widely deployed. And at least Iran's APS doesn't come preloaded with a foreign policy. Israel's trophy, by contrast, comes with optional extras like collateral damage, diplomatic immunity, and a press kit blaming Hamas before the explosion stops echoing.
Can you imagine how hard it is to stop Ronaldo from scoring a goal?
Early Zulfiqar 1 models allegedly used a Slovenian EFCS 3-fire control system, also used in an upgraded Iranian T-72 variant, which allowed fire-on-the-move capability. This means the tank can reasonably aim and shoot while moving. They also have a laser rangefinder and possibly a laser warning receiver to alert the crew if they are being targeted by laser-guided weapons. Over time, Iran claims to have improved the Zulfiqar's electronics. By 2012, Iranian army officials unveiled a new digital fire control system and laser rangefinder for the Zulfiqar, boasting that it can now vie with the world's most advanced tanks. Iran iterated on the design in several stages. The Zulfiqar 1 was the original, first shown in 1994 with around 6 prototypes by 1997. At least 100 to 150 Zulfiqar 1 tanks were eventually produced, estimates vary. The Zulfiqar 2 was more of a testbed, an interim prototype with an improved engine and possibly an elongated chassis and better autoload. You can think of Zulfiqar 2 as a bridge between the original and the next model, not a fully filled tank. It's the tank equivalent of puberty. The big leap came with the Zulfiqar 3, the most advanced variant. R&D on Zulfiqar 3 finished by 1999, but it wasn't publicly seen until a military parade in 2011. Zulfiqar 3 features a redesigned turret, notably one that suspiciously resembles a US M1 Abrams, improved fire control, a more powerful engine with around 1000 horsepower according to some Iranian sources, and additional armor including skirt plates over the tracks. It still uses the 125mm gun with an autoloader. Only a limited number of Zulfiqar 3 tanks were built. Iran has displayed a handful in exercises and parades. Western analysts note that the Zulfiqar 3's similarity to the American M1 Abrams might not be coincidental. There were rumors that Iran examined wrecked US Abrams tanks left in Iraq after 2003. Whether true or not, the Zulfiqar 3 certainly shows Iran's attempt to move towards a more modern-looking tank. One of the biggest drivers behind the Zulfiqar project was self-sufficiency. After 1979, Iran's supply of Western tanks and parts was cut off, and during the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq war, their armored forces suffered. By the 1990s, Iran had a mix of aging Western tanks like the M60 and British Chieftains, and newer Soviet T-72s they imported. The Zulfiqar was meant to be Iran's first indigenous main battle tank to avoid reliance on foreign suppliers. Iran set up manufacturing through its Defense Industries Organization. In the late 90s, officials announced the mass production of Zulfiqar was underway. They manufactured hundreds of tanks parts and even established facilities to produce not just Zulfiqar tanks, but also other armored vehicles like the Borakh APC and assembly of BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles. By 1979, Iran was talking about eventually producing hundreds of Zulfiqars. However, it appears actual production was fairly limited. The International Institute for Strategic Studies estimated around 150 Zulfiqar 1 tanks in service and perhaps around 100 Zulfiqar 3 tanks built as of the 2010s. Some Iranian sources claim higher numbers, even up to 250, but these are unconfirmed. Observers believe the Zulfiqar was made in small batches and never built in the numbers required to replace Iran's Cold War T-55s, T-72s and the skeletal remains of pre-revolution M60s. But the truth is, we don't know the exact numbers. The gap between what's said and what's real could fill an entire UN sanctions report. Now, why was the production so slow? Likely due to technical and financial hurdles. According to analysis by Farzin Nadimi from the Washington Institute, the Zulfiqar 3 never entered large-scale production due to technical and perhaps budget issues. In other words, Iran found it challenging to produce a truly modern tank with its limited industrial base and under sanctions. Instead, by the mid-2010s, Iran shifted focus to upgrading its existing T-72 fleet, cheaper and more readily available, and later developing the newer Karar tank, which itself is essentially an upgraded T-72M. The Zulfiqar thus ended up as a stepping stone, an important project to train Iranian engineers and demonstrate capability, but not the ultimate workhorse of the army. To Iran's credit, yes, they do sometimes earn one. The Zulfiqar program did help push domestic military know-how forward. They locally produced tank ammunition, 125mm rounds, and claimed to integrate local optics and fire control systems. Brigadier General Ahmed Reza Burdastan, then Army Ground Force commander, often spoke about continually optimizing the homemade Zulfiqar to keep it battle ready. For instance, in 2012 he unveiled an improved fire control system and stated the Zulfiqar was being updated each day so that the tank could maintain its efficiency on the battlefield. This indicates that even if the tank wasn't mass-produced, they used the prototypes and limited units as test beds for technology, everything from engines to electronics. How does the Zulfiqar fit into Iran's overall armed forces? The Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard Corps today field a variety of tanks. Numerous T-72s, some imported, some assembled domestically, older M60 Patents and Chieftains, leftovers from the 1970s, and even some T-54 and T-55 and Type 59 variants, older Soviet and Chinese tanks. Between them, they operate roughly 1,600 tanks of all makes, models and mechanical streams, many of which are old enough to remember the Shah and might technically qualify for veteran pensions if they were human. Of those, only a small fraction are Zulfiqars, roughly 100 give or take as mentioned. So the Zulfiqar has never been the majority of Iran's tank force. Instead, it's a niche capability. The Zulfiqar tanks that do exist are believed to be operated by the regular army, not the IRGC. The Artesh Ground Force likely integrated the Zulfiqar ones into one of its armored brigades for home defense roles. They have been occasionally shown in military exercises within Iran. For example, Zulfiqar tanks were paraded during annual Army Day events, April 18, and Sacred Defense Week parades every September. They've also appeared in some large-scale drills, often exercises themselves named Zulfiqar, followed by a year or Persian calendar name, which can be confusing since the drills carry the same name as the tank. These exercises allow Iran to showcase the Zulfiqar as proof of domestic military technology, which has value for propaganda and deterrence. In terms of doctrine, Iran's military strategy historically didn't emphasize tank offensives, especially in recent decades. Iranian commanders have openly prioritized asymmetric warfare, things like missiles, drones, guerrilla tactics, over expensive armored thrusts. This is partly because they recognize their tank fleet is not cutting edge and would struggle against a technologically superior foe in conventional battle. Throughout the 2000s, tanks took a bit of a backseat in Iran's planning, but then Syria happened. The Syrian civil war gave Iran something it hadn't had in a while: a front row seat to modern combat and a chance to test its theories on someone else's soil. Iranian advisors and forces deployed alongside Assad's loyalists. Their friendly stay reminded Iran that tanks can still be very useful in certain situations. Iranian tank crews gained experience in Syria alongside Syrian Arab army units, learning how modern tanks survive, or don't, in urban guerrilla warfare. These lessons spurred renewed interest in armor by the mid-2010s. That's one reason Iran pushed forward with upgrading T-72s and announcing the new Qarar tank in 2017. So where does that leave the Zulfiqar? Essentially as proof of concept vehicles and gap fillers. They signal that Iran can build a tank on its own and they could be used defensively if Iran were invaded. But Iran never built enough Zulfiqars to form a large armored core of them. Instead, they rely on a mix of older tanks in greater numbers. The Iranian army's bulk remains those older models, T-72s and so on, with Zulfiqars sprinkled in possibly as command tanks or to equip an elite unit for domestic defense. Notably, Iran has not exported the Zulfiqar to any allies or clients, unlike, say, how Russia or the US export their tanks. It's purely an indigenous asset. There were no reports of Zulfiqars being sent to proxy forces or other countries, likely because Iran itself only has a few and they are more valuable at home. Even during heavy fighting against ISIS or other threats in Iraq and Syria, Iran sent older T-72s and crews rather than something like the Zulfiqar. So far, there are no confirmed reports of a Zulfiqar tank being used in actual combat operations. The tank has been around since the late 1990s, but Iran hasn't fought a full-scale conventional war in that time. The Zulfiqars have mainly shown up in controlled settings, parades, war games and test firing events. For instance, Iranian media have occasionally shown footage of Zulfiqar tanks firing their guns on training grounds or driving through obstacle courses. A notable clip in the late 2010s showed a Zulfiqar 3 test firing on a range, demonstrating its gun and perhaps an outdoor sequence. These are likely meant to prove that the tank is operational and to refine its design. There were rumors but little evidence of any Zulfiqar deployment in regional conflicts. Not in Syria, not in Iraq, not even as a background extra in some dusty militia selfie. During the Syrian civil war, where Iran sponsored the worst reality show on earth,
fighting terrorists is like a video game.
The tanks spotted were mostly T-72 variants and a few upgraded older models. No Zulfiqar sightings were ever confirmed. It stands to reason Iran would be cautious about sending its limited Zulfiqar fleet abroad, where one could be destroyed or, worse, captured by opposing forces. Imagine the propaganda win if ISIS or any rebel group had knocked out a Zulfiqar on camera.
We are uncompromising in our call to Tawheed. We only bow to Allah.
Tehran wouldn't want that, so they kept their prized homemade tanks on Iranian soil. Within Iran, the Zulfiqars likely would have a role if Iran had to defend against a ground invasion. They could serve as mobile reserve units to plug breaches or as a part of armored counterattacks alongside more numerous T-72s. But again, given their small numbers and uncertain reliability, they'd be a supplement to Iran's defensive strategy, not the linchpin. Now, an interesting angle. What does the Zulfiqar mean strategically for Israel? Absolutely nothing. Direct tank battles between Israel and Iran are just about impossible due to geography. They're over 1,000 kilometers apart and separated by other countries, and unless tanks can start teleporting or be launched via ballistic missiles, there is no plausible scenario where Zulfiqar and Merkava are going to meet in some desert and deliver a fight. If they were in a direct confrontation, it would look exactly how it's looking right now. Israel using their modern air force to bomb targets in Iran, and Iran using their large stockpiles of missiles to bomb Israel. So, in a literal sense, Israeli and Iranian tanks are not going to crawl towards each other across 3 sovereign countries and a few US forward operating bases. That said, Israel keeps a close eye on Iranian military developments, obviously including tanks. Israeli defense analysts and media often scrutinize Iran's weapons projects to gauge how real the threat is. The Hebrew media have at times been openly skeptical about the Zulfiqar. In fact, some Hebrew language reports have dubbed Iran's homegrown weapons industry a fake industry, producing paper tigers. A 2013 Israeli article in Mako, a popular news site, bluntly concluded that the Zulfiqar is not really a new tank. It cited IDF armor experts who claim the Zulfiqar is basically an old American M60 tank that's been given a makeover to look somewhat like an Abrams. They noted Iran might have only a handful, perhaps around 10 operational Zulfiqar tanks, and thus the design has negligible impact on the regional balance.
Are you serious right now, bro?
This rather dismissive view uses phrases like old tank with bodywork done, implying Tehran just put new armor plates and a new turret on a 1960s era chassis. It's a harsh assessment, but it highlights that Israel doesn't seem alarmed by the Zulfiqar itself. From Israel's perspective, their own main battle tank, the Merkava, is a much more battle-tested and sophisticated machine. For context, the Merkava Mark III and Mark IV have fought in conflicts like Lebanon and Gaza, and they emphasize crew protection, with the engine in the front acting as an added shield, and heavy firepower. The latest Merkava Mark IV variants sport the Trophy active protection system, which can detect and shoot down incoming anti-tank missiles in real time, but Iranian tanks do not have an operational active protection like Trophy, which leaves them more vulnerable to modern anti-tank weapons. Israeli tanks, on the other hand, have been shown surviving attacks that would likely destroy a Zulfiqar thanks to systems like Trophy and better armor. Strategically, the Zulfiqar changes nothing for Israel. It's not a threat, it's not a game changer, it's not even a speed bump. From Tel Aviv's point of view, the real dangers from Iran are ballistic missiles, nuclear ambitions, and a spiderweb of proxy forces like Hezbollah rather than Iranian armor. However, the Israeli analysts did consider how Iranian tanks could bolster Iran's allies. For example, if Iran was to base some Zulfiqar or other tanks in Syria, close to Iran's border or supply them to groups in a future conflict that could become a tactical concern. But since the new government in Syria took over, that became just about impossible as well. And that hasn't happened either, possibly due to the Zulfiqar's limited numbers and Iran's reluctance to risk its loss. Anyways, that was it for this video. If you liked this video, then like this video and subscribe if you're actually cool, and follow me on Instagram if you're even cooler. That was a bad outro, and I'll see you next time.